Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we're speaking with Mark Willie in conjunction with his Cerulean Arts Collective Exhibition, which is on view now through June 24th. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for letting me do this. Absolutely.
Of course. So tell us a bit about yourself and the show.
So the show is recent work that I've been within the last year. My right now my professional hat that I wear is a professor of design, graphic design at Drexel University, and I've been doing a lot of sort of a mixture of plein air work. In this case, what you're looking at right now are watercolors that I've been working on, mixed with some collage work. And then I've also been starting to work in stone lithography. And so that's sort of a balance between these sort of three mediums and three sort of approaches to my work. So the plein air obviously is, on site. They're really responding to the environment I'm in, and like any kind of plein air painting, it's like you're in the environment, and so they tend to, particularly the watercolors, tend to be fairly quick kind of responses. And then, of course, on the opposite end of that is the stone lithography, which is much more process oriented, and this whole sort of level of sort of labor that goes into producing the stone lithography. And then sort of the combination of those ideas are working with collage. So I'm taking things that I'm thinking about and looking at in the plein air environment and then retranslate them. And oftentimes they'll be sort of repurposed images. So again, as the watercolors are not a new medium for me, but I sort of came back to watercolors after sort of working in oil plein air for a while, and then I came back to doing watercolors. I really like this sort of immediacy, and of course the watercolors are also in some ways mixed media because they're it's both watercolor, ink, crayon in some cases, and sort of graphite scratching, etc. So, but they have a certain immediacy that I really am drawn to in that medium, and then particularly since they're being done on site.
You also painted oil plein air too, right?
I have painted in oil at plein air, so this was kind of a departure to go back into doing watercolors, and I really liked it. And actually, it was nice to come back to watercolors because obviously it's a different media, but I really enjoyed the sort of challenge of working. Watercolor is a little less forgiving in that sense than oil is, and so that sort of immediacy and I'm really interested in kind of responding to the environment and mark making, and so and I think that's evident in the the work of the watercolors because it's kind of mixed media as well.
So the landscape is New Jersey.
So most of this work, I think all of the work in the show is based on landscapes in South Jersey. So it's kind of the Delaware Bay area of South Jersey. So it's a lot of rural farmland, marshlands. A lot of these things are a lot of the images or the paintings are from looking at sort of marsh landscape. So it's very sort of this flat landscape. There aren't a lot of hills. The forests are kind of brush-like forests. So, and then the sort of wetlands. And so that is sort of a particular kind of landscape that's found in that area in South Jersey. So I really enjoyed working in that environment.
Do you have an attachment to that area?
Well, my wife and I have a sort of historic home that we've been restoring over the years. And so it's down in a little town called Greenwich, which is near the Delaware Bay. So it's again in sort of those marshlands, estuary area. That's not quite it's not the Jersey Shore. It's sort of, so it's a very rural kind of area where time is kind of stopped in the 19th century. So those landscapes are really that landscape really informs kind of all of my work right now. And so these are larger scale collages. So they're basically they're inspired by the landscape, but they're not directly, I'm not painting directly from the landscape as plein air. And many of them are sort of recycled paintings that I've done. So I'll take pieces of other paintings that I've maybe done in the area and then reconfigure them in a collage, and they're sort of painted into, sort of glued into a substrate and manipulated and overlaid and painted into. So that's so these are more, kind of landscape as as memory, and then it's also including the sort of mark making and sort of process. So I really like this as a way of I still try to approach the work as in sort of in sort of immediate way, but these are I spend obviously more time on these, sit in the studio for a while. I keep coming back to them, and so I might work on these in sort of multiples. So I have like several of these going on at the same time. And
So
again,
Mark, collage, do you feel your background as a graphic designer makes collage comfortable for you as a process?
sure. And I think that, a lot of graphic design, regardless of whether it's done digitally or analog, is cut and paste. So that's sort of a big part of like a graphic design. And it's also the idea of breaking down a space into a grid. So these are and that's the other sort of connection in many ways to the South Jersey landscape, is that it in some ways is very gridded anyway. So yeah, so I think a lot of that uh, sort of iteration and play and collage and cut and paste all sort of come from that language and that background in graphic design. And it's something that I work with my students all the time on sort of graphic design projects, but it's in some ways a similar process. So I think the collages are really also drawn from the plein air work, but also really dependent on the process. It's sort of like improvisation in a way, and sort of experimenting with and I'm never really sure where they're leading. I mean, they always have sort of like a sort of landscape qualities to them, but then how different aspects of the different parts of the composition kind of respond to each other, and that kind of interaction between various papers that I'm applying to it, then painting over, and what gets revealed, et cetera. And that's what I really enjoy about the collages too, is that ability to kind of have things that like pieces of it reveal themselves, so little pieces of other paintings, and the structure starts to develop out of that interaction.
So Mark, I'm curious to know, so you're a teacher, but you also had a graphic design business. So were you working on your own art during that time, or did you come back to it later? Or how do the two things fit for you?
I mean, I've always been sort of doing my own work regardless, and it depended how much time and energy I was able to put into it. So when I had my own design office, it was a lot less of that. Getting now I'm sort of teaching full time, and I not that I have like a lot of extra time, but I think it affords itself to let me spend more time painting. And I did actually come back to it as in a more focused way, I think, in the last several years. So, and I think that, my interaction with students the sort of processes and iterations that I work with students on also inform like how I work with my paintings as well.
So the teaching, I mean, is it computer based? And then your work here is like hand work. So
Well,
is that a contrast, or is that correct, or is that like a misconception?
it's a little bit, well, so, in graphic design, ultimately everything ends up in a digital
Right.
environment. But a lot of the process that I work with my students is in many ways analog. So we do a lot of image making and collaging, even with typography. So one of the tools that I use in my classes is the copy machine,
Uh-huh.
and laser printers and sort of collage techniques in terms of ideation and iteration, and even from things as simple as sort of logo design and design based on form to larger, more complex projects in branding and and identity systems and stuff. So it always is manifested in the result is usually digital, but the processes can be analog, and even if they're digital processes, sort of a similar idea of like juxtaposition and montage and sort of iteration and repetition, et cetera. Um, so these that you're looking at right now are they're lithograph. They start out as lithographs and then they're painted into. So there's like the process of the stone lithography is in the sort of embedded in the image, and then I'm manipulating with paint and scratching into them, et cetera. So that's kind of a hybrid um, of drawing, collaging, and the process of printmaking. So these are one-offs, but they're based on the underlying is a lithograph that has been manipulated.
So is the lithograph a fairly new thing for you?
Lithography is fairly well. It's not. I came back to it after I was doing lithography when I was in college and art school. So, but yeah, it's been decades, and so it's really exciting to come back to lithography in sort of a serious way. I've been taking a few courses, and then been have access to a printmaking studio at Fleischer, which I'm able to work fairly regularly on. And again, this is sort of, I'm also experimenting with um, improvisation a little bit. Some of these lithographs they're all drawn into, but they may start out, for example, starts out as a kind of transfer of a collage. So the collage is created, cut apart, put back together again, photocopied. Sometimes this is 3 or 4 photocopies of collages that I started with, and then transferred onto a stone, and then manipulated and drawn into and painted into, and then etched and was able to reproduce it on a press. So there's many stages of this, and of course lithography is in some ways kind of a tedious process, which I really am taking to, because I try to express the immediacy of the work in the image making, and yet there's a very long kind of arduous process to get there. And so I find that really rewarding, and that connects pretty directly to graphic design and the idea of that things are in multiples and sequences. So these again are landscape based essentially, but they're kind of collaged in their first stages, and then manipulated. And there's various techniques that I'm using with these lithographs. So again, I really enjoy um, the hands-on processes. I'm learning a lot about stone lithography, and I'm interested in how I can take these sort of one-off lithographs and then manipulate them again in another medium like collage. So
And unlike the other printmaking processes, lithography, you're not carving into the surface or like you do with relief. It's more of an application of grease to the stone.
it's essentially chemistry, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of so the stone is like you're sort of etching into the stone, but it really is all about sort of chemical reactions and stuff. So and it's grease and acid and water, and they sort of all combine together. So but it can also be, it's an additive process, but it also can be reductive. So some of these are what's a technique called meneur noir, which is like basically starting with a black surface of grease and then sort of removing the grease in various ways through scratching and etching. And some of these are done with, sandpaper or steel wool almost, and then again, sort of removing the material. This is actually an example of kind of a collage that was then photocopied, kind of scanned and scaled and changed and then transferred onto the stone and then drawn into and painted into. So there's like a lot of sort of processes involved in getting to that image making. I find that really satisfying, and I think they're sort of abstractions, but also based on that sort of landscape form. So
Well, it's a great combination of media. So, you're always, I mean, if you get stuck with painting, you can always do some printmaking or get stuck there and then I'll cut it up and make collage. So there's always something you can do.
yeah, it's true, and I think that's where right now that's where I'm sort of excited where the work is going, where it can go. That I really like the sort of focus in the printmaking, which is again focused on sort of that process, and there's a long expanse of time, and then the immediacy of the watercolors out in the field on like the weather and everything, and then that kind of then been able to sort of go back to sort of my design roots and sort of manipulate them in collage. So I think right now I'm like really enjoying that balance between all three of those, and it's and one informs the other, and I think that's keeps the work lively for me, and yeah, so
Well, it's a great show, Mark.
thank you.
And thanks so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you.